This video is going to introduce the concept of lifetime value. The way you should think about lifetime value is that it's the expected amount of profit that you will derive from a customer relationship into the future. Let me begin by offering an example for why this might be an interesting concept to use. Whenever a business makes a decision about a customer relationship, it wants to make sure that that decision is going to be profitable. Now, the idea of customer lifetime value is that you shouldn't consider only the immediate revenue that you derive from that transaction. You should consider the transactions into the future. To give a concrete example, suppose I have an online retailer, and the online retailer spends a large amount of money, say $100, to acquire a customer. Now you might wonder, how does it spend $100 to acquire a customer? Well, it has to do a lot of advertising, and most of the ads that it shows will be ignored. And then a small percentage of those ads that it shows will actually convert. So this retailer may spend $100 to acquire a customer, and this customer spends, say, $30. Well, is this a good decision to spend $100 to get $30 back? The answer is that it depends on how well that retailer can keep the customer. So let me sketch a few things. One really important relationship that usually occurs with retailers is the relationship with frequency. So frequency is the number of times that a customer has made an order. And I'm going to plot on this axis the probability of buying again. Now, the typical relationship between frequency and buying again looks something like this. You get a very low probability that a customer who has bought never before buys again. But the curve increases very quickly and then probably approaches an asymptote at some point. And so the whole idea is that if you're a 50-time buyer and I get you to buy a 51st time, that's not much of an increase in the probability that I get another order from you. However, if I can get someone who's never bought from me to buy once, the next time I send them something, they're going to be more responsive. And likewise, if I can get you to go from 1 time to 2 times, I also get an increase in the purchase probability. So the point is this: if I take someone who has never bought from me and I get them to buy from me into the future, they become habituated and become more likely and more responsive to my offers in the future. I'll mention one more relationship that you should know about, and this is the relationship between recency. So recency is how long has it been since you've purchased from this company. So if it's been 2 years since I purchased from a retailer, my recency would be 2 years with that retailer. If I bought from them last week, my recency would be 1 week. Let's also look at the probability that a customer buys again as a function of recency. The usual shape of this curve is something like this. So if I have not bought from you in 5 years, chances are I'm not going to buy again. But if I bought from you last week, I'm pretty likely to buy from you again. And so if I were to get an existing customer to buy again from me, and maybe this customer hasn't bought from me in a year, so this is 1 year out. If I can get that customer to buy again, the next time I send that customer something, the customer is going to be much more likely to purchase again. So the point I'm trying to make is that if I can get a customer to buy, I get the value of the immediate order, but I get something probably equally valuable to that order, which is I have a better customer. The customer is more likely and more responsive to buy from me in the future. So with that as a little introduction for why we might care about lifetime value, I'd now like to define some terms that we're going to be using throughout this module. So the first concept that I want to define is customer profitability. Customer profitability is simply the difference between the revenues earned and the costs associated with the customer relationship during some specified period in the past. So the way I like to think about this is there's a timeline. And at some point, we have now. So this is where we are right now. If I take some period in the past, so for example, perhaps this is my period and it's 2 years, and I look at how much have customers spent, so that's going to be revenue, less the relevant costs. So relevant costs could include things like the amount that I spend on getting these customers to buy again. Of course, cost of goods sold, we'd want to take out of this. But the point is the profitability of those customers during some past period is going to be called customer profitability. Now, contrast that with lifetime value. So lifetime value, which I'm going to denote by CLV for customer lifetime value, is a projection. So you cannot measure lifetime value. Let me repeat that. Lifetime value is a forecast, it's a projection that cannot be measured. It can only be modeled. So it's how much profit do I expect to derive from a customer relationship into the future. So more precisely, lifetime value is going to be the present value of all future cash flows attributed to the relationship. Sometimes there's a distinction made between prospect lifetime value and customer lifetime value. So if now is immediately before spending money to acquire some prospect, then what that means is the amount that I spend to acquire the customer needs to get deducted from the future projections of the cash flows. Alternatively, if now is sometime after I've acquired that customer, so now the prospect has become a customer, then we're going to call it customer lifetime value, and the acquisition costs are not included in that. That's water over the dam. We've already had those expenditures. We only care about the revenues that are going to come in the future. So if you'd like a formula for lifetime value, we can use the following formula. So V sub T is going to be the net contribution of some customer during period T. The way I think about periods is that this is going to be time 0. So let's just label that time 0. This is going to be period 1. This would be time 1, and then we have period 2. ... All right, so we will often think in terms of discrete periods, like a month. And this is often because the relationship works in monthly periods. So if you think about your subscription to Netflix, you pay them for a month of service. If you decide to cancel your Netflix subscription right here, I don't think you get any reimbursement from Netflix. So Netflix gets you for the entire month. Likewise with cell phone service, you pay for a month, or cable TV service, you pay for a month. So we're going to be thinking in terms of these discrete periods because the billing often occurs in these month-long cycles. So the net cash flows in period 1 we're going to call V1. The net cash flows in period 2 we're going to call V2. Now, we don't measure these cash flows because they are in the future. All I can do is compute an expected value. And so we will just take that expected value, the denominator discounts it back. So D is the period discount rate, and T is going to be how long you have to wait for that discount. One fine point here, I'm assuming that the payments start at time zero. So with Netflix, I have to give them some money, they bill me, and then I can start watching stuff. So the first payment is not discounted. So the payment for month one does not have any discount. Thereafter, into the future, we're going to discount, and the further off into the future, the greater the discount. Another concept that we're going to be using is customer equity. So customer equity is the sum of the lifetime values for all of the firm's customers. The way to think about customer equity is a customer database is an intangible asset of the firm. So if I have a database of 100,000 customers who know me and like to buy from me, that's an asset that is intangible. So what is the value, the monetary value of having 100,000 customers who buy from me? And that's the idea of customer equity. We're going to use this for a number of things. So one use of this is to value these intangible assets. So if you want to buy a company that has such a database, what is that database worth? We're also going to be using customer equity to think about when we have an intervention. So if I do something different to my customers, what I want to know is what effect is that going to have on the value of this database? So we're going to be using customer lifetime value when we evaluate different possible actions that the firm can take. So a good general purpose objective is to do things that increase lifetime value. So there's a very important word here, which is increase. I'm not as interested in the absolute level of lifetime value. I'm more interested in what I can do to make lifetime value larger. We're going to be using this as a guide for our resource allocation. So when you're evaluating different courses of action, the question is, how is this going to affect lifetime value? What that really means is, how can I affect a change on this expected value of V sub t? So this slide gives a list of ways of increasing the expected value of V sub t. One of the most important ways to increase V sub t is to have a better retention rate. So do a better job of retaining your customers. The reason for this is if a customer is no longer with me, then the expected value of that customer's contribution at some time period t is going to be zero or maybe even negative if I'm expending resources to try to get that customer back. So rule number one is keep your customers. Now there can sometimes be exceptions to that rule where there are customers that you just don't want to have as customers. One example is what the credit card industry calls a diabolical. A diabolical is someone who runs up a large amount of credit bills and then goes bankrupt. You obviously don't want that sort of customer around. But in most cases, the first rule is keep your customers. Another set of things that you can do are to focus on spending levels. We can think of these V sub t's, so V sub t as the revenue at time t minus the relevant costs at time t. So another thing that we could do is either increase the revenues or decrease the costs. So let's just go back to my course packet and think about how to increase revenue. So one way to increase revenue is to get customers to buy from more product categories. So sometimes this is called increasing the share of wallet. So for example, if I have a grocery retailer and this grocery retailer has customers that are buying their produce and their meats from the grocery store, but are not buying wines or personal care products, that grocery retailer can make customers more valuable by getting them to buy from their wine selection or buy their cleaning supplies at this grocery store. Another way to get them to increase their spending levels is to get them to buy higher priced and hopefully higher margin items. So if I have my grocery store and I have customers who are only buying the cheapest private label brands, if I could get them to buy more profitable brands, that will increase their lifetime value. Another way to increase this is to get them to buy more often. So suppose I have a grocery delivery service and I have a customer who only buys twice a month and they're getting their other groceries from another source. If I could get that customer to buy 3 times a month, that customer will become a better customer. As another example, I am sitting here with a MacBook Pro, and I guess I upgrade this thing every 5 years. If Apple could get me to upgrade this every 4 years, I become a better customer to Apple. So those are different ways of increasing the spending level. We can also reduce costs. So there are really 2 costs to think about. So one is the cost to serve, the other is the cost of marketing to that customer. I could do things to reduce the cost of service, such as if I'm a bank, I could get customers to use ATMs rather than tellers. So this was a very famous example in the 1990s where banks started charging teller fees. Why? Because tellers are expensive, ATMs are comparatively cheap. So I can serve the customer cheaper if they use the ATM. There are many examples of this. I can remember a time when I would call the airline to book a ticket, and of course having a telephone agent is much more expensive than having a website, and so they would much rather have me go to the website to book a ticket than call in. So most airlines will charge you if you want to talk to them. Sometimes these reductions in cost to serve are not as obvious. So we actually worked with a grocery delivery service once where they had many customers who placed very small but frequent orders, and that turned out to be not very profitable because if I spend $50 or if I spend $200, the cost of getting the delivery truck out to my house is the same. So they'd much rather have me place a large order and get the delivery truck out once rather than placing multiple orders with small amounts. And so to make me more profitable, one thing this delivery service did was to incent customers to place larger order sizes. Sometimes there are customers that just cannot be made profitable, and in that case, you don't want to stop marketing to them. Another way to reduce costs is to reduce the marketing expenses. So if I can get you to sign up for a longer-term contract, so think of me signing up for 2 years of service rather than 1 year of service, what that means is after 1 year, you don't have to remarket to me because we have a commitment. So if you can get me to commit to a 2-year contract with you, I become a better customer. There are other ways of increasing the value of a relationship. So when you have prospects, an immediate goal, I would call this an upstream goal, is maybe you want me to just sign up for a newsletter. So when I sign up for a newsletter, I'm allowing for a firm to market to me. And this is the first step in converting me into a full-time customer. So the point I'm trying to make is that you don't always have to have an immediate financial outcome. Sometimes there could be other outcomes that happen along the way. So upstream is what I would call that, that before I become a customer. I can also, sometimes I want to reactivate a customer. So if I have a customer who has stopped buying from me, I will have programs to bring that customer back. Other ways that customers can become better customers is by referring others or passing positive word of mouth. So WM is word of mouth. So how do we estimate lifetime value? Well, in this module, we're going to cover two different situations. One is called the gone for good situation. The other is always a share. So gone for good is where the relationship ends in a bang. So in these settings, customers will provide some cash flow every period until they cancel. And once they cancel, they never come back. We're going to be calling this the retention model. So for example, cable TV is one of these situations where I send in a certain amount of money each month. I do that until I no longer want the service. Cell phones would be an example. Netflix would be another example. Where we're going to go with this is we're going to start with a model called the simple retention model, which makes some very strong assumptions, but turns out to be a very useful model. We're then going to relax those assumptions with something called the general retention model, and we're going to use survival analysis to estimate retention rates with this model. There are some other models that we're not going to have time to cover in this, such as the beta geometric model. Always a share relationships have this property. Customer inactivity in some month doesn't mean the relationship is over. This is very common in, for example, retail or travel, hospitality. So if I don't buy from LL Bean this month, that doesn't mean I'll never buy again. If I don't fly with American Airlines this month, that doesn't mean I'll never fly again. It just means that I'm not traveling this month. We're going to talk about one approach, which is the Markov chain model approach for handling this situation. So in my next video, we'll talk about the simple retention model.